The sky above southern Iceland was gray, but not dark. Thin clouds moved across the high cliffs near the sea, and the wind spoke in short, sharp bursts. Waves below crashed against black rocks, sending salty mist into the air. On a narrow path above those cliffs, two hikers stood still. One of them pointed. "Is that going up?" Before them, water rushed over the edge of a tall cliff, but instead of falling down toward the sea, it rose, like smoke caught in reverse. A stream of white water lifted upward, twisting and dancing, pulled into the air by something unseen. It shimmered in the wind, then vanished into the mist above. It looked impossible, but it was real. The hikers stared for a long time. They didn't speak. The waterfall, if it could still be called that, had no sound, only the wind howling softly around it, carrying the water skyward like a breath drawn in. Then, as quickly as it had started, the water dropped again, falling like normal. The strange moment passed, leaving only damp air and wide eyes. Later, in the nearby village of Skogravik, people spoke about it over coffee. "Again?" an old man asked. "Yes," said a younger woman. "Near the northern cliffs. The wind was strong." The old man nodded slowly. "It happens, always has, but only when the sky is right." No one in the cafe said much more. In this village, some mysteries were simply part of the landscape, like the moss, or the light that never fully left in summer. That same evening, in a small guest house on the edge of town, a woman named Dr. Elise Moran looked up from her notebook. She had come from France to study a rare type of moss that grew only in these cold and windy places. She had seen strange things before in nature, but never water moving against gravity. She read the note that had brought her here again. "Sometimes the falls flow upward. Locals say it is the wind, but it feels more. Come if you want to see for yourself." She thought it was a joke. Now she wasn't so sure. Outside, the wind touched the glass of her window, and somewhere beyond the cliffs a waterfall waited, sometimes falling, sometimes rising, always pulling at the edge of understanding.
Elise zipped her jacket up to her chin. The morning air was cold, sharp like a blade, and the wind pushed softly at her back as she walked the narrow trail above the sea. Her boots pressed into damp soil. Far below, waves struck the cliffs again and again, steady as breathing. She wasn't here to study waterfalls. She was a botanist, a scientist of plants. Her notebook was filled with sketches of mosses and tiny flowers that grew in difficult places. She had planned to collect samples along the cliffs and study how the wind and salt air shaped their growth. But now her curiosity had turned. The waterfall wasn't listed in any geology book she had read. No paper described it seriously. It was something people whispered about, something travelers took videos of, something villagers mentioned with half smiles and soft voices. She wanted to understand it. At the edge of the village, near a line of low stone fences, she met a boy. He was small, maybe 10 years old, with dark hair that curled above his ears and boots far too big for his feet. He was throwing stones into a puddle. "You're the moss lady?" he asked without looking up. "Excuse me?" "My mom said there's a moss lady staying at Hilder's guest house. That's you, right?" "I suppose I am," she said with a laugh. He stood. "I'm Arnie. I know where the water goes up." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" "Everyone knows," he said, "but not everyone watches." She looked at him closely. There was no joke in his voice, no silliness in his eyes. "Can you take me there?" she asked. Arnie nodded. "You'll need better boots." By midday, they were hiking together. The wind had picked up, and Elise held her scarf tightly. Arnie moved ahead like someone who had grown up with wind in his ears and rain in his sleeves. He stopped often, pointing out birds, sheep bones, strange plants. "There," he said at last, pointing across a deep green valley. A tall cliff dropped straight down into the sea. A thin stream of water rushed off the top, but instead of falling, the spray broke apart mid-air and twisted upward. The wind caught it like a net. It danced, shimmered, and vanished. Elise took a slow breath. "It's like the water doesn't know which way is down," she whispered. "Sometimes it flies higher than the birds," Arnie said, "but only when the wind is strong and soft." Elise took out her notebook. She sketched the shape of the land, the height of the cliff, the curve of the fall. She placed a small wind sensor near the edge and marked the time. As they sat on a rock, eating cold bread and cheese, Elise asked, "What do people say about it?" Arnie shrugged. "Old people say it's the mountain breathing. Others say the sky is thirsty." "And what do you think?" He smiled. "I think it's just a waterfall that got bored." Elise laughed, but as she looked out at the strange rising stream, she wasn't so sure it was boredom or wind alone. It felt like something else.
The next few days passed in quiet rhythm. Each morning, Elise walked the narrow paths with her notebook and small pack of instruments. Arnie often joined her, skipping ahead or walking in silence beside her, depending on the wind and his mood. He seemed to know where to step, how to read the land, when the rock would slip, or when mist might rise from the sea below. Elise focused on details. She placed wind sensors near the cliff edge and tied thin orange ribbons to short sticks to watch how the air moved. She measured the angle of the waterfall's slope and tracked the strength and direction of the wind every hour. Her notebook filled with data: temperature, humidity, cloud cover, water flow rate. But the waterfall did not rise every day. Some days it fell like any other waterfall, straight and cold, tumbling down into the sea with a steady roar. Other days it scattered slightly in the wind, but not enough to lift. And sometimes, when the wind was wild and fast, it disappeared into chaos, blown sideways in all directions. But then, once, on a still morning, with light wind from the south, it rose again. Not far, just enough to hover. The water curled upward, lifted by a current Elise could not feel on her skin. It shimmered in the low sun, floated for a breath, then fell back down like silver threads. She recorded everything. Arnie watched from a mossy ledge above. "Not the strongest wind," he said, "but a kind wind." Elise nodded. "It's not just speed, it's shape, the way the air curves here." Arnie didn't answer. He was watching the water, noticing. Later that evening, Elise sat by the fire at her guest house. Her laptop screen glowed with graphs and maps. The data still made no clear sense. High winds did not always lift the water. Low winds sometimes did. Moisture levels seemed to matter, but only a little. Temperature played a role, but not consistently. She rubbed her forehead. She whispered, "There's something missing." In her notebook, she wrote, "Pattern not obvious, may involve narrow alignment of wind direction and shape of cliff face, water volume, heavier equals less likely to rise, air pressure layers, timing, early morning,
post-rainfall? Theory: rising effect only occurs when several elements gently align. The next day, Arnie led her to a smaller cliff nearby. "No waterfall here," he said, "but when the wind comes from the sea and hits this point, listen." Elise stood still. A soft tone passed through the rocks, a humming, almost like a low flute. "It sings," Arnie said, "like the wind is playing something." Elise looked at the shape of the stone, curved like a shell with small gaps and hollows. The wind, funneled through this rock, created sound. "If sound can rise," she whispered, "maybe water can too." She felt something click inside her, an idea just beginning to take shape. Maybe the waterfall wasn't breaking gravity. Maybe it was following something, invisible, a path shaped by the air itself.
Elise returned to the cliff with new eyes. She began to see not just a landscape, but a system. Air, water, stone, light, all connected, all moving in quiet patterns. Her instruments became extensions of her curiosity. A small drone, borrowed from a friend at the university, hovered above the cliffs, recording the shape of the land in sharp detail. She mapped the contours of the rocks, where the cliff jutted out, where it curved inward, where air might compress or lift. She marked spots where the wind echoed or shifted. Slowly, a theory emerged, not of magic or mystery, but of alignment. Elise began calling it the wind tunnel effect. The cliffs acted like a funnel. When the sea wind moved in from the southwest, it struck the curved cliff face and rose, forming an upward current strong enough to lift mist, and, on rare days, even full streams of water. But it wasn't just the shape of the rock. It also depended on moisture in the air, temperature layers, and the volume of water falling at that moment. Still, not everyone agreed. That afternoon, Elise sat in the village cafe, notes spread out before her, when an old woman approached. "You're the one chasing the flying water," she said, placing a cup of tea beside her. Elise smiled. "I suppose I am." The woman nodded. "My grandfather called it the breath of the sky. He said when the land listens and the wind speaks, the water goes where it's told." Elise paused. "Do you believe that?" The woman shrugged. "Belief is not the same as measurement, but sometimes it's close." She pointed to Elise's notes. "You're drawing lines and graphs. That's good. But don't forget to listen." Elise didn't speak. The words sat quietly inside her. That evening she hiked alone to a small ledge just above the waterfall. The wind had changed, softer now, cooler. The sea was still. She closed her eyes and listened. There it was, a soft rushing, a bend in the air. She opened her eyes. The water began to lift, not at once, but in gentle streams. Threads of water curled upward into the wind, spun in sunlight, and vanished into mist. She smiled, almost forgetting to take notes. She wrote later, "Confirmed. When air pressure lowers near cliff base and upper wind crosses at an angle, the falling water is lifted by localized vertical flow. But only when water is light enough, fine mist or thin streams. Heavier water falls, lighter water rises." She paused, then added, "Some villagers call it the sky's breath. Perhaps both are true." Back at the guest house, Arnie waited on the porch. "Well?" he asked. "It lifted." He grinned.
Told you.
Elise laughed. You did. As the stars appeared, she felt something settle inside her. Not a solved puzzle, but a quiet understanding. The waterfall flowed upward not because it wanted to, not because it was special, but because the world around it shaped a path that was always there, just hidden until the wind found it. The storm came suddenly. By late afternoon, the sky turned dark, heavy with clouds pulled in from the west. The air thickened. Birds flew lower than usual. Waves slammed into the cliffs, harder, louder. Elise stood outside her guest house, watching the trees bend in the wind. Arnie stood beside her, his small hand gripping the strap of his backpack. "It's coming," he said. "The kind of wind that sings." Elise nodded. She had seen the forecast. Strong coastal winds, shifting air pressure, and a sharp temperature drop. If the waterfall ever had a perfect moment to rise, this might be it. "Are you ready?" she asked. Arnie grinned. "Born ready." They climbed the hill fast, the trail slippery from earlier rain. The wind pushed against them, howling through the grass and whipping their coats. Mist from the sea rose like ghosts between the stones. When they reached the top, the cliff edge looked different, wilder, less like a ledge and more like the lip of a giant's breath. The waterfall ahead surged with force, pouring over the edge in thick streams. But as they watched, something changed. The wind, instead of pushing sideways, curled. It gathered beneath the fall like a hand and lifted. The water didn't just rise. It stretched, twisted, became a column of silver light. It danced in the storm, spinning upward into the clouds. Elise gasped. Arnie dropped to his knees. The sound was unlike anything she had heard before. Not roaring, not crashing. It was music. Low, hollow tones, like a flute carved from stone. The cliff face echoed, turning air and mist into song. Elise grabbed her instruments, turned on her camera, and hit record, but soon let it hang around her neck. Some things, she thought, weren't meant to be captured. They were meant to be witnessed. The waterfall held its shape for almost a minute, suspended between earth and sky. Then slowly the stream bent, broke apart, and fell, scattered droplets landing like rain on the rocks below. The wind softened, the cliffs grew still. Arnie whispered, "It flew." Elise sat down, breathless. Yes, it did. They stayed there as the sky darkened. She recorded her thoughts in quick lines. Emphatic, storm winds created perfect upward draft through narrow cliff tunnel. Water rose completely. Shape held steady. Sound possibly caused by air vibrating in hollow rock chamber. Local term, the singing wind. But then she stopped writing. She looked out at the cliffs, the sea, the soft curve of the land that had built this moment, not with force, but with alignment, balance, and timing. Not everything could be explained in charts. Some things belonged to the land.
The next morning, the storm was gone. Sunlight spilled over the cliffs, drying the stones and warming the grass. The waterfall had returned to its usual shape, falling straight down the rocks with a soft, steady sound. No music, no rising water, just gravity doing what it had always done. Elise sat alone near the edge, the same spot where the water had flown into the sky. Her instruments lay beside her, silent now. The data from last night was already saved. Wind speeds, pressure changes, water volume, everything recorded. And yet the most important part of what she saw, the feeling, the sound, the moment, was something no machine could hold. She opened her notebook one last time. The waterfall rises when the wind sings, but the song depends on shape, timing, and the silence between things. The cliffs guide the wind, and the wind lifts the water. It is not a trick. It is a pattern too rare to catch often, too quiet to measure completely. She looked out over the sea. Clouds moved slowly above the horizon. The land felt still. Arnie arrived quietly and sat beside her. "Are you leaving today?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, my work here is finished." "Did you solve it?" Elise smiled. "I think I understood part of it, but maybe not all." Arnie looked out at the falls. "That's okay. Some things just want to be seen, not solved." She laughed softly. "You're wise for someone with muddy boots." He looked down. "They're always muddy." She stood, brushed off her coat and turned toward the trail. The backpack felt heavier, but not in a bad way. It was filled with more than samples now. Drawings, wind maps, notes, and something harder to name. Before she left, she paused and looked back. The waterfall fell gently now, quiet and plain. But she knew better. It could fly if the world allowed it. And when it did, it carried more than water into the sky. It carried wonder. It reminded those who watched that the world was full of patterns not yet noticed, and that nature sometimes spoke in whispers. At the bus stop outside the village, Elise sat alone. In her lap, her notebook lay open to a final page. Sometimes the land holds a secret, and sometimes the wind tells it. She closed the book as the bus arrived, the road ahead waiting in sunlight. The cliffs grew smaller behind her, but the sound of the wind rising through the rocks stayed in her ears. Not loud, not urgent, just there, always singing.
Learning recap. Key vocabulary from the story. Cliff, a high, steep rock face, often found near the sea. Example, the waterfall poured from the edge of the cliff into the ocean far below. Mist, tiny drops of water in the air, often seen near waterfalls or early in the morning. Example, a light mist rose from the crashing waves below. Alignment, the correct position or arrangement of things for a specific result. Example, the waterfall rose only when the wind and pressure aligned perfectly. Contour, the shape or outline of land or a surface. Example, Elise studied the contours of the cliff face. Theory, an idea or explanation based on evidence and reasoning. Example, she formed a theory about the rising water being shaped by wind. Instrument, a tool or device used for scientific measurement. Example, she used small instruments to record the wind speed. Vibrate, to move quickly back and forth or up and down. Example, the rock walls vibrated, creating a low sound like a song. Rare, not happening often, uncommon. Example, the rare Ephes upward waterfall was a rare event that required perfect conditions. Whisper, a soft sound or gentle voice. Example, Elise said the cliffs seemed to whisper during the wind's rise. Witness, to see or experience something directly. Example, she felt lucky to witness the waterfall rising into the sky. Useful sentence patterns for practice. It wasn't just wind, it was a song shaped by stone. Only when the wind turned gently upward, the water began to rise. She began to see not just a landscape, but a system. Some things are meant to be seen, not solved. Even falling water, under the right conditions, could fly. Comprehension questions. What unusual event does Elise travel to Iceland to observe? How does Arnie help Elise understand the waterfall? What scientific conditions seem to cause the waterfall to rise? Why does Elise stop relying only on instruments and graphs? What does the singing wind suggest about the cliffs and the air? How does Elise describe the relationship between the waterfall and the wind? What lesson does Elise take away from her experience? Open discussion question. Do you think science and storytelling can work together to help us understand nature better? Can emotions and curiosity be as important as data when studying the natural world?